Welcome to Biology of Marine Mammals. I am Dr. Leslie Williams, and this lecture is about exploring life in an aqueous environment. Recall that mammals actually evolved in a terrestrial environment, one that is surrounded by air. So when mammals started to re-enter the water, they were posed with a completely different environment, an environment of water. Living in water poses its own unique challenges compared to living in air. So mammals had to learn how to adapt to those different conditions. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of those properties of water and how they influence marine mammal body design. All right. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at three major properties, and then we're going to explore a couple of them in great detail, including how the density of water influences the skeletal support, how we move in water, and how water determines the overall shape of the marine mammal. All right, get out a pen or a pencil and write down these three very important properties of water. The first one, water is 1,000 times more dense than air. So that means the density of water is 1,000 times greater than the density of the air around us. The second one, water is about 50 times more viscous than air. And finally, the third one, water transfers heat about 25 times more efficiently than air. So these are going to be properties of water that are considerably different than properties of air. Again, in each case, marine mammals will have to learn how to adapt to those different properties. Otherwise, they won't survive in an aqueous environment. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first one in some detail. Water is 1,000 times more dense than air. The first question you should ask is, why is this an important property? In order to determine why this might be an important property, what we want to do is we want to take a look at the skeletal system. Every mammal is equipped with an internal skeletal system made of bones. Those bones, of course, provide the support for your body mass. Your bones help keep you upright. If I didn't have any bones in my body, I'd probably be about this tall on the floor because I wouldn't have the skeletal system to keep me up. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the skeletal system in relationship to the overall size of the particular mammal. And to do that, I'm going to turn your attention to three different mammalian skeletal systems. We're going to go ahead and start here with a dog. This, of course, was a dog that maybe was about 25, maybe 30 pounds when this dog was alive. And we can see this beautifully preserved skeletal system. And where I want to draw your attention to is actually the hind leg, where my finger is tracing right here. And we can get a good idea for the size of the bones that make up that hind leg that obviously supported this particular dog. Now, if we go ahead and we take a look at our hind legs, that of course is just our legs because we're bipedal and we're upright. The largest bone in our body is the femur, which is the one I'm holding up right here. We can see that it's considerably longer to support our taller or larger size. It's also going to be thicker, and what may not be obvious is that it's considerably stronger. It's also going to be more dense to support the additional weight. That density is going to add weight of its own, so this bone is actually fairly heavy. Now finally, we're going to turn to an even larger terrestrial animal, that of a horse. And over here, we have the skeletal system of the horse. So when you take a look at this, you know, of course, horses are much larger than human. You can see, of course, that the bones are longer, they're thicker, and what you may not be able to see is that they're going to be denser or heavier to support the weight of that particular horse. So from there, we can make this general trend. The larger the mammal, the stronger, denser, and larger the bones must be to support their overall body mass. Okay, this definitely applies to terrestrial mammals, but does it apply to aqueous animals as well? To answer this question, let's turn and look at the salamander. Now, the salamander, which is actually an amphibian, spends most of its time in the water. When we take a good look at the salamander skeleton, we can see that the limbs are not nearly as thick as some of the other ones that we just looked at. In fact, they're actually quite small and feeble. So this brings up a very interesting question. Does water have a different effect on the skeletal system than air? And the answer is absolutely. Here's why. Water exerts a negative buoyancy. So if you've ever floated in water before, you know that you feel lighter, you can lift things, you can even lift other people with relative ease. And that is called negative buoyancy. So you're going ahead and you're counteracting the forces of gravity, which is pulling your body down, that you're trying to use your skeletal system to counteract against. But then when you're in the water actually alleviates all of that for you, or at least most of it, giving your skeletal system a respite from your weight. Thus, in water, you do not need as strong of a skeletal system to support the same mass as you do on land. All right, let's explore that in a little bit more detail by taking a look at the largest terrestrial animals, which are elephants. Elephants weigh anywhere from 4 to 11 tons, and they're the largest largest terrestrial mammals on Earth right now. Okay, if you've ever seen an elephant move before, you understand how heavy they are and what consequence that weight actually plays on their mobility. So elephants tend to lumber around, they're not necessarily very quick, and you can definitely see that they are in a constant struggle to support their massive weight. Okay. In fact, when you take a look at elephant skeletons, especially their limbs, they're so heavy, they're so dense, that it actually takes a couple people to lift them because they're so heavy. Now you might imagine if we were to make an elephant twice as large. Let's make a 22-ton elephant. What would be the consequence? Well, it would need even a bigger skeletal system to support its massive weight. This, of course, is going to have huge consequences because not only are they very, very heavy, their skeletal system is heavy too, and it makes it so difficult for them to move around that at some point it's not going to be beneficial to be bigger because you don't gain enough benefit versus the con or the risk of being heavy. So too many problems associated with being heavy when you get that big. But what about when we move from the air to the marine environment? Is it a different scenario? And all signs would point to most definitely. Here's a striking fact. The largest blue whale ever recorded was 190 tons. That is substantially larger than an elephant. And of course, blue whales are the largest animals to ever live. And notice they don't live in the air, they live in the water. So what's really going on here? Okay, mammalian bodies are about 70% water. So the density of a mammalian body is pretty close to the density of water. So when you get into water, you almost float. Okay, the consequence is, of course, that you don't need a huge skeletal system because that crushing weight that you actually felt on land is not experienced in the water. What this means is that you can get much, much, much bigger. So on land, there seems to be almost a weight-related cap on body mass, and we see that with the elephants. Getting much bigger than an elephant is going to have too many negativities associated with it, but not necessarily in the water. And so for this, we see huge marine mammals. Marine mammals are allowed to grow much, much, much larger as a consequence of the property that water is 1,000 times more dense than air, and therefore provides some of the support for that mass that the skeletal system does not have to. All right, now that we've done that one, let's go ahead and turn to the second one. Water is 50 times more viscous than air. Before we get started on this, let's go ahead and talk about what viscosity actually means. Viscosity is a measurement of the thickness of the fluid. So water is going to be more viscous than air. You know that it's more difficult to move through water than through air. If you've ever tried to walk 50 meters versus swim 50 meters, it takes a lot more effort and energy to move that 50 meters in the water versus in the air. And here's an experiment that you can actually try at home to demonstrate that water is much more viscous than air. Go ahead and take your hand and make an arc, like so, and figure out how fast it's going to take you to make an arc with your hand. I could probably do it in maybe a little bit less than a second. Then go ahead and fill your bathtub up with water, stick your hand in the water and try to make that same arc in less than a second. And you'll notice, if you can do it at all, it takes much more effort. And that is because your hand moving through the water takes a lot more energy, and that is because water is much more viscous or thick. To take the analogy a step further, imagine if you filled your bathtub up with syrup, like maple syrup, a medium that is even more viscous than water. You try to move your hand through that, you're going to have even more difficulty moving through it. So the consequence is that movement through water is going to be much more difficult on account of drag. That is the force we experience that counteracts you're trying to move through the water or the viscous medium. So marine mammals have had to deal with this stress, which of course makes it more difficult to move through the water than through air, and they do it two ways. First and foremost, they try to maximize their ability to move forward. So this is your propulsion force, and we're going to take a look at this in a different lecture. The second one will start here, and that is minimizing drag and resistance. And there is a generic answer to this: change your body shape. So what do I mean by that? Be as most hydrodynamic as possible. Experiments have shown the most hydrodynamic shape is indeed a teardrop. We see the same type of thing with an aerodynamic shape, of course a very aerodynamic car. You're trying to minimize the drag in the water. Let's take a look at marine mammals. Do you think they have a hydrodynamic shape? You bet. All marine mammals have pretty much done two things to try to make themselves as most hydrodynamic as possible through the water. First and foremost, have that teardrop shape that almost looks like a torpedo. We have a picture here of dolphins and a picture of a seal, so two totally different marine mammals showing the same trend, that hydrodynamic shape. The other thing you want to do, minimize your appendages. If you have them, put them behind you or make them small. If you've ever tried to dive through water and you go ahead and you make an aerodynamic or a hydrodynamic shape, you move through a lot faster than when you spread out your appendages like such. That increases the drag, making it more difficult to move. All right, thank you, and I'll see you next time.